Hey, Mike with Rove Pest Control here. And over the past few years, you've probably heard about some bee populations having some troubles, their numbers dropping, various things like that. Well, today's video I'm going to talk about are humans really negatively affecting bee populations and what can we do about it? So some recent studies have been coming out talking about the issues that bees are having with their populations and how humans could be causing or influencing those different things. So one thing to keep in mind is that happening? What can we do to prevent it? But also, you may or may not know why bees are so important to us as a whole as humans. Now, bees actually pollinate a huge portion of all the food and crops around the world. It's estimated that they will pollinate about a third of all the crops in the world and flowers and different things that can be pollinated, for example. Now there's different animals, bugs, pests, different things like that that do help with pollination, but bees actually make up the majority of the animals and insects that actually pollinate the world as a whole. So if we lose the bees, that's a huge hit on the economy and our food sources as a whole. They'll actually pollinate well over a third of all of the crops that we as humans eat, and in the US alone, that equates to about well over $20 billion a year that bees are responsible for when it comes to different crops. They actually pollinate a whole lot of different things, from soybeans to asparagus to citrus fruits to cranberries to melons and on and on. On top of that, they even pollinate different things like alfalfa and various grasses that our livestock eats. On top of that, they also pollinate non-food source crops, things like cotton, for example. So they make a huge impact on our economy and our ecosystem as a whole. So it's very important to keep these bees safe and intact, but some of the negative things that can happen along with them being responsible for so much pollination is that one strategy that the US and many other countries use is they'll actually take hundreds if not thousands of hives of bees and they'll pack them up and they'll ship them across country to pollinate various food sources and different crops throughout the year. We're humans, what we do now is we overgrow, we create too much food in a sense that it's unable to be pollinated by a single source of bees that's local to the area. So what they'll do is they'll ship bees, like I said, across the country and sometimes across the world to be enough to actually pollinate all the food that we're growing in single areas. Now what this can actually do, unfortunately, is end up hurting these bee populations. Now some actually die during shipping, which isn't good, but at the same time, another factor that can come in is as we're shipping these bees from country to country or just simply across countries in general, that can do a lot of damage where it can introduce these bee population to different predators that are only local to specific parts of the world, damaging the hives that have been transported, but also with that, shipping these other predators and threats along with the bees to other parts of the country and world as well. So this has been doing damage in that way. On top of that, in addition to predators, this has also been happening with various diseases that are only affecting bees in some parts of the world, but now that we're shipping them everywhere, it can cause these diseases to spread very quickly throughout various populations where normally without our interaction, they never would have encountered whatsoever. So this is potentially doing a lot of damage to the bee population. Now, different suggestions have been brought up of increasing regulation, making sure that bees can only transport between one country themselves, so from different parts of the country but not internationally, or creating more stricter regulations if you're going to be shipping internationally. So there's a lot of different things out there that could potentially solve this or at least improve this issue, but it seems like with where it's at now, it can potentially lead to a lot of damage and be harmful to the bee population. Another area where humans are negatively affecting the bee population is in the form of like hobbyists or amateur beekeepers. Now, you may have seen them online, you may not, but I know I've seen different ads on Facebook or various social media platforms coming through about new technologies to kind of have your own beehive at home, gather your own honey, and the technology makes it simple. Now, while that sounds really great and it has some great benefits to it, Unfortunately, what that can also do is attracting a lot of amateur beekeepers or hobbyist beekeepers that don't really follow through. I mean, have you ever had a hobby that ended up in the garage? You know, maybe it's a piece of exercise equipment you saw in an infomercial. Now it's hanging out gathering dust in your basement or your garage years later. Well, unfortunately, that happens for a lot of people when they take up beekeeping as a hobby. They don't necessarily follow through. They don't get the proper training. They don't get everything set up like they should. After a while, it kind of fades out and they move on to the next thing. Well, that can potentially do a lot of damage to these bee populations where, again, they're not properly treated or cared for, where, again, bees from outside sources can come to these new hives, and if they're not properly maintained or the upkeep isn't there, again, it can end up killing off these populations, introducing potential diseases because they aren't properly cared for. And again, if the hive is abandoned, well, those bees can go somewhere else and spread that disease, spread those issues, because amateur or hobby beekeepers weren't properly taking care of those locations. So some different things that people have suggested that could be potential improvements would be making stricter regulations for becoming a beekeeper or being like an amateur beekeeper, where right now, depending on what state you're in or city or various things like that, how many hives you have, how many bees you're actually keeping, there could be little to no regulation, while other areas might be more strict and require licenses. So again, it's kind of up in the air in a lot of different places, and when these bees are in that hive, they don't just only stay there, they can potentially spread to other hives. So again, if these amateur beekeepers or hobbyists aren't doing what they should be doing, it could be introducing those threats or diseases or potential problems to other hives and spreading throughout the world as well. And again, with the earlier thing we talked about shipping bees all over, that could spread those issues from local areas internationally in a matter of time. So again, some different suggestions that have been thrown out there that could help with these issues would be stricter regulation, requiring licenses or more training if you want to be a hobby beekeeper or something to that effect. Also having tighter knit community groups where, for the most part, many of these beekeepers or amateur beekeepers are just reading what they find on the internet and trying to figure it out on their own, where there's not really a community or support. So establishing that for resources to go to, adding in more opportunities for higher education for these hobby beekeepers, different things like that. So stricter regulation, more education could be a potential way to solve some of these issues. But again, humans have been unfortunately having a negative impact. And so with those extra regulations or education in place, more licensing, whatever the case might be, could go a long way to preventing some of these issues that humans are causing to bees. So again, hopefully you got some benefit and value out of this video. If you did, feel free to comment and share. And if you happen to have some pest issues in your home, feel free to reach out to us over at rovepestcontrol.com. And then if you happen to be a first-time customer with us as well, you can reach out to us at rovepestcontrol.com/50 off, and then fill out your information there to get $50 off your first service with us. But thanks again for tuning in. We'll talk to you more soon.